be dismissed to Children's Church. If you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 18. And we're going to look at chapter 18 beginning in verse 16 to chapter 19 and verse 38. You know, if somehow we had foreknowledge and we knew that in 3 months the Lord was coming back, we knew the exact hour He was coming, our lives would change, and the closer we got to that time, I'm convinced the more righteous we would become. If we truly knew the moment and the hour He was coming back, our lives would be different. Well, Lot had no idea when judgment was coming, but it's coming. And so there's approaching judgment here, but the thing we need to realize is Lot was mesmerized by Sodom. Remember, he kept pitching his tent towards Sodom, and he pitched his tent towards Sodom, and now he's living in downtown Sodom. Even calling the Sodomites my brothers. He was enamored with the culture and the societal life. He failed to notice that he had fell into a pool of iniquity and debauchery. Sodom and Gomorrah was known for the depth of the vilest perversion known to man. And he lived right in the middle of it. One thing Lot did not count on was the fact that there comes a time in human history when God decides enough is enough, and He executes His righteous judgment on man's sin. And God applied what you might call apocalyptic truth to the civilizations of the wicked cities, and yet Lot was totally unaware of impending doom. So I want to talk to you about approaching judgment and impending doom. In chapter 18, beginning in verse 16, Abraham had been sitting with the angel of the Lord, who is the second person of the Trinity, and 2 other angels. And he's now taking the custom of the day and walking them out as far as the end of his property would go, which would have been quite extensive since God had given the whole land of Canaan. So he'd already fed them, had a wonderful meal with them. He's now walking them away, and we pick up on it in verse 16. Then the men rose up from there and looked down towards Sodom. And Abraham was walking with them as he sent them off. And the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Since Abraham will certainly become great and mighty nation, and out of him the nations of the earth will be blessed. For I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteous and justice, so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he had spoken of." And the Lord said, "The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave." Not just grave, exceedingly grave. "And I will go down now, and I will see whether or not what they have done with the entirety of the outcry, which has come to me, and if not, at least I will know." And then verse 22. Then the men turned away from there, and they went towards Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham approached and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" You might want to underline that. That's kind of important. Because what he's saying, he said, and we're going to see this in just a moment, if there's some righteous people there, are you going to make them go through the trials and the tribulation? Are you going to make them go through the judgment? I think it's a very valid question. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous people in the city. Will you indeed sweep away and not spare not the place for their sake of the 50 righteous who were in it? Far be it from you. This is Abraham reminding the Lord that. Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? So the Lord said, "If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within that city, then I will spare the entire place for their account." And Abraham said, "Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord, although I'm only dust and ashes. But suppose the 50 righteous were lacking 5. Would you destroy the entire city because of the 5? And he said, I will not destroy it because of the 45 there. And he spoke to him yet again. He said, suppose the 40 that were found there. And he said, I will not do it on the account, or I will not do it on account of the 40. Then he said, "Oh, may the Lord not be angry with me. For I shall speak," meaning I shall speak to you one more time. I've already been praying and pleading with you. I'm going to do it one more time. "Suppose there are 30 that are found there." And he said, "I will not destroy it for the 30 that are there." But he said, "Now behold, I have ventured to speak to the Lord. Suppose there's 20 that are found there." He said, "I will not destroy it on account of the 20. Then he said, "Oh, may the Lord not be angry. I shall speak only once, this once. Suppose there are 10 there." And he said, "I will not destroy it on account of just the 10. And as soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. Lot had no idea what was coming. In verses 16 through 22, I want us to notice Abraham intercedes. He's actually praying. He's interceding with the Lord to spare Sodom and Gomorrah. Abram went down to send off these men as was the custom of the day. And so the Lord says, should I go ahead talking to the other angels? Should I tell Abraham what I've got planned? Well, it's just moments away from happening. Should I let him know? After all, I have promised him all these things. Perhaps I should go ahead and fill him in on this too. And that's what he did. He said, shall I hide anything from Abraham? Now, what are the reasons that it's important about this passage? When it says the outcry has come up from Sodom and Gomorrah, and it is great, it is exceedingly, or it is multiplied, wicked. It is grave. Now, this cry comes from a lot of places. One, God in his holy justice cries out against Sodom, because his holy justice has to be answered. The onlooking angelic beings have cried out against Sodom. God, how long will you allow Sodom and Gomorrah? We know your heart. We know how you are. How long will you extend grace to them? The multiplied victims, there were victims of Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, these two men, as they were going in, they wanted to make them victims also, not realizing they were angels. I find it interesting, Abraham knew they were angels, Lot didn't. Of course, Lot was not a very spiritual man. The multitude of the victims that had experienced the depravity in those cities, they cry out for justice. And then creation itself, because of their unnatural transgressions, it says even nature itself cries out. And he says, I will go down and I will see. Because of the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous, according to Psalm 19:9 and Revelation chapter 16, verse 7, God would not only judge Sodom and Gomorrah on direct but accurate knowledge. He's not going to take, I couldn't tell the Lord, they're evil out there, and you take my word for it. He says, I'm going down, that I may know accurately exactly what they've done. The charges have come against them, but I'm going to go see for myself. In verse 22 through 33, Abram asked that important question when he asked him, Lord, will you do just the same? Will you destroy the evil and the wicked and the righteous all at the same time? Why would you destroy those who are righteous with the wicked? In discussing this question, in a sense, Abraham is reminding the Lord, you have a nature, you have principles by which you operate, and God, I can't think of any world in which you're going to judge the righteous with the wicked. This was a growing experience for Abraham. That's exactly what it was. God knew what he was going to do all along. He knew it would get down to the 10. And he knew that even then there would be 10 that would be found righteous. In fact, there's only 4 in the whole city. But it says something about prayer. The effective prayers of knowing who God is and knowing how God works in particular situations. Effectual prayer. That's what Abraham had. He was praying. Isn't it interesting? He cared for the whole. I would have thought that Abraham would have said, Lord, it's okay if you don't destroy them because they are wicked. They are evil. They are the worst in the world that you can imagine, and they're worse. And so he's asking him, he says, Lord, will you indeed take the righteous and the wicked, and will you judge them exactly the same? He says, God, I can't imagine a world in which you would do that. Abraham was actually strengthened in his faith. I find it interesting that he didn't just say, Lord, will you go down and get Lot out? Get Lot and his family. Do with the rest of what you want to. But he's not. He's actually praying for the people of the city. That shows the compassion and the love that he had. Abraham was a remarkable man. And so what God is doing in this is showing him the grace that he has. And so what he's wanting him to do, he's wanting his faith to increase. He's wanting his compassion and his love for others to increase, and we see here that it does increase. And later on, as we look at Abraham's life, we'll realize this actually became a focal point in who Abraham was. He starts out with, suppose there's 50. He says, no, I won't be angry with that. He gets all the way down to 10. He says, even if there's 10. Now, the Lord knew there wasn't 10 there. But if you find 10, now Lot has 2 unmarried daughters. He's got 2 married daughters. Surely, between all of them, they can find 10 people. And Lot had lived there for a long time. Surely he's got some friends. Surely there's got to be, if 6 of them are in the family, surely there's got to be 4 more. Well, even the 6 in the family wasn't righteous. Only 4. And we see that. But this is the kind of heart that God wanted to draw out from Abraham. A heart that cares so much for the people. He can't imagine God doing anything except what God has already promised. He says, you've already promised me to be a mighty nation. How are you going to judge me along with these others? Teaches us we should be interceding for our nation. We live in we live in Sodom and Gomorrah. Just look at what's going on. I don't have to go through all the details. You live here. You know, one of the saddest things that I mentioned this in Sunday school, one of the saddest things that really bothers me is what Brunswick County schools are teaching our children. Now, there are some good teachers. There are some wonderful teachers. They're trying to do their very best to keep the curriculum as godly as possible and not deal with all the junk that's coming out. But think about it, in one sense, I'm not talking about the school system in New York or LA or San Francisco. I'm talking about Brunswick County. Brunswick County is a very insignificant county in an insignificant state on the globe. And look at what they're teaching our children is right and what is wrong. Or, what is right and there is no wrong. You do what you want to do, when you want to do it, how you want to do it, and it's quite all right. Because that's what you want to do. So I'm thankful for the teachers that we have that are standing up and doing their very, very best to live a godly life as an example for our students. But our own school system is teaching them to become debauchery. And we need to do what we need to pray for our nation. We need to pray for our school system. We need to pray for the elections that are coming up. Listen, I can promise you this. It doesn't matter who the Democratic nominee is and who the Republican nominee, and anybody decides to run as an independent. It doesn't matter. They don't have the solutions to our problems. The problem's in the heart of men and women that claim to be Christians, and we need to stand up. Like Daniel stood up. He purposed in his heart, I will stand for the Lord no matter what. And he did. We need to stand for the Lord no matter what. Abraham was that kind of a person who stood for the Lord. There are 3 signs for impending judgment. You might want to write these down because they may be closer than you think. First is loss of character. In the first 11 verses in chapter 19, we see a loss of character. God will only allow perversion and wickedness with his judgment before he sends his wrath. God judges us and sends his wrath. Beginning in chapter 19, verse 1. Now the 2 angels, talking about the 2 men who had been sitting with Abraham, came to Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting at the gate. He wasn't even in his house. He's out with all the men of the city at the city gate in Sodom. When Lot saw them, he stood, he went up to meet them, he bowed his face before the ground, and he said, Behold, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet, and then you may rise early and go on your way. And they said, No, but we shall spend the night in the public square. And he said, I strongly urged you. So they turned aside and went with him and entered into his house. And he prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house, both young and old, all the people from every quarter or every quadrant of the city. And they called out to Lot and said to him, Where are the men whom came into you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may have relations with them. But Lot went out the door, shut the door behind him. He said, Please, my brother. Once again, that's who you want to call your brother? I'd rather call you my brother. You're my sub-brothers and sisters, not those Sodomites that were living there. Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now look, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with any man, those are virgins. Please let me bring them out to you, that you will do with them whatsoever you like. Are you kidding me? You won't let them have the men, but you're willing to give them your 2 young daughters to do with whatever they want to do with. Lot had bought into it himself. He thought this was a better option than the other. Only do not do the things with these men because they have come under my shelter and under my roof. And they said, get out of the way. And they said, this one came as a foreigner, and already he is acting like a judge. And now we will treat you worse than them. And so they pressed hard against Lot and moved toward the breaking of the door. But the men reached out with their hand. They brought Lot back into the house and shut the door. And then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, from the smallest to the great, so that they became weary of trying to find the doorway. You see what happened? Sin had gotten so, the debauchery was so bad, so evil, so wicked. The perversion was to such an extent that Lot's willing to send out his young virgin daughters for these men to do anything they want to. It doesn't matter how vile, how corrupt. So then the angels blind these men. And then notice that last verse that we just read. They became weary of trying to find the doorway. Some versions say they groped at the door. They're still so overcome with the lust of their flesh. They've now been blinded. But they still want to get these 2 men. At any cost. We can look at them and say, well, boy, I mean, Lot and his family and these people, they deserve to be destroyed. I mean, they deserve to be wiped out. I mean, this is bad. But look in our own society today, the things that is being promoted. And I have to ask the question too, God, if you struck Sodom and Gomorrah down for this, how much longer will you tarry before you bring judgment on us as a nation, as a people? And I have to say, from the looks of things, it looks like we're in trouble. We're in serious trouble. God will bring judgment sooner or later. Several things happen, become apparent when society loses its character. First, sin becomes prevalent. Sin was once done in shame. Think about it. It's now done in the open. And those secret sins, they're not secret anymore. In fact, it's not even really sin if you don't know the truth about it. That's what society says. I've got this one little glitch. It's not a big, just this one little bitty thing. You know, it's not a sin. I like the whole idea, white lie, black lie. So one's better than the other? A lie is a lie. Now, I know there's some things that sometimes it's hard to answer. For example, if your wife gets a new haircut and she comes out, honey, what do you think about my hair? Well, if you really don't like it, there's a better way to say, you know, you could go get it all shaved off or something. There are nice ways, but you got to tell the truth. I always tell Debbie the truth about whether I like her hair or not. Y'all haven't noticed any black eyes? There's ways to always tell the truth. There are no big truths and little truths. There are no big lies and little lies. It's either true or it's a lie. But sin becomes prevalent. Those things we used to hide and do, they do in public now. They don't even care. There's no such thing as shame. You notice that? There was a time when you got caught doing something, your face turned red because you got caught. You knew it was wrong. And now people will tell you, it's not wrong. There was a time when sin was sin. But now it's just part of our lives. And by the way, when sin becomes a part of our life, it leads to perversion, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. The second thing, sin becomes perverted. Look at verse 5. Sin always leads us deeper and deeper and deeper into perversion. And then third, sin becomes persuasive. In verses 7 and 8, I want you to notice Lot. Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now look, here are my 2 daughters who've never had a relation with any man. Please, let me bring them out to you so you can do with them as you wish. And again, like I say, seriously? Lot had gotten to a place. Listen, he loved being, he could have moved out. He could have lived the life that Abraham lived. He could have worshiped God and loved God and been a man of righteousness, but he wasn't. He loved what Sodom and Gomorrah had to offer. And there's a lot of people that love exactly what's being offered today. He says, let me give you my virgin daughter. You talk about a reprobate mind? When God says you continue on this sin, on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And he says, finally, he'll take his hand off of you and he'll turn you over to a reprobate mind. Meaning you'll have no desire to be saved whatsoever. You won't have any desire for the things of God. And it won't bother you to live this kind of lifestyle. That's where he was. He had a reprobate mind. And in 4, sin becomes punishment. Look at verse 11. And they struck the men blind at the doorway of the house, from the smallest to the greatest. And they became weary at groping for the door. I'm afraid America's already been blinded. But instead of repenting, they're still groping at the door. When I'm one of the days I'm going to stop being amazed. I'll see something, and by the way, I don't put a whole lot of stock in Facebook, except for the fact that it says in Facebook, it's probably absolutely untrue. But there are a lot of sources out there that you can really get a touch on what's going on in the world today. Like in the business world, the Fortune 400, if you want to know what big business is doing, read it. It'll let you know what big business is doing. But when we look at what's taking place today, we realize that our world has become blind. And they're groping at the door, wanting more and more debauchery. The second thing is the loss of conviction. Look at verse 12 through 26. Beginning verse 12, and the 2 men said to Lot, who else do you have here? Now listen to these people who he has. A son-in-law and your sons and your daughters and whomsoever you have in the city, bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place. Because of the outcry has become so great before the Lord that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-laws and who they were about to marry with their daughters and said, get up and get out of this place, for the Lord is going to destroy the city. But he appeared to his sons and sons-in-law. They thought he was joking. When the morning dawned and the angels urged Lot, saying, take up your wife and your 2 daughters, these are the virgins, those who are here with you, and you will be swept away within the punishment of the city. In other words, if you don't go now, it's going to hit you too. I'll give you a chance to go, just you 4. But he hesitated, and the men grasped his hand and the hand of his wife. Notice the angels had he's dragging them out now. I believe if an angel was before me telling me that God's about to destroy this place, color me gone. I'm gone. You don't have to have some angel drag me out of the midst of sin. Verse 17, and when they had brought them outside, one said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stay anywhere in the surrounding areas. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, oh no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight. You might magnify your compassion, which you have shown to me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Now behold, the town that is near to here, may we flee to it, for it is small. Thinking that because it's small, I'm not going to have as much sin. Please let me escape there, so that my life may be saved. And he said unto him, behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore the town was named Zor, and the sun had risen over the earth, and the light came to Zor. Then the Lord rained fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of heaven. And then he overthrew the cities and all the surroundings and all the inhabitants of the cities which grew out of the ground. But Lot's wife, from behind him she looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Lot is running all over Sodom, warning his friends, his family, you need to get out. They think he's joking. Seriously, God's going to have his angels come and destroy our city. We'll take our chances here. I find it interesting. Abraham was a man of influence. We talked about this morning. Daniel was a man of influence. Lot was not a man of influence. He couldn't convince anybody. In fact, he wasn't even convinced himself, because the angels had to drag him and his wife and his 2 daughters. He had to drag them out of the city to get their attention. That's how deep in sin they were. And I would have to say, I don't see much different when I read God's Word and what I see in America taking place today. Lot's running all over. He had lost his conviction. And by the way, it doesn't take long. If you lose your conviction, let me tell you what's going to happen. Your children are going to lose their conviction. Your grandchildren will lose their convictions if you lose yours. And that's what happens when societies turn so corrupt. Look at verse 17. And when he had brought him outside, he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Escape to the mountains. By the way, when it says that Lot's wife, she looked back, I mean, she's already mourning. Now, they've drug her out of the city. And she looks back because she's mourning what she's already left. She's wanting to go back, looking back, going, oh, but I had such a wonderful time there. I loved what was going on. It was just such an amazing... And she looks back. And there was a desire in her heart to turn around and go back. So God turned her into a pillar of salt. And then look at verse 24. And the Lord God himself rained fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's what it says. He came from the Lord out of heaven. I find it interesting that down by the Dead Sea, there's two places where they're about the size of Sodom and Gomorrah probably were city-wise. And it's all this volcanic ash and all this volcanic things that come out when it erupts, lava. And it's always two distinct areas. And people have been trying for many, many years to try to figure it out. Well, a volcano must have erupted and shot its stuff to these two locations. No, there's not a volcano within 1,000 miles of there that could produce that. The Bible says that God himself rained fire and brimstone, which comes out of a volcano, but he did it from heaven. Why? Because God had a particular target he was aiming at. And God always hits his target. The third thing is the loss of conscience. Look in verse 27 through 38. It says, now Abraham got up early in the morning, and he went to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward the land of the surrounding area. And behold, he saw the smoke of the land. It ascended like the smoke of a furnace, so that it came about that when God destroyed the city surrounding the area, God remembered Abraham, and he sent Lot in the midst of him out of the destruction. And he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Lot has no idea how close he was to losing his life. Now Lot went up to Zoar with his two daughters and stayed in the mountains because they were afraid to stay in Zoar. And they stayed in a cave, and he and his two daughters. And his firstborn to the younger said, our father is old, and he is not a man on earth to have relations with us according to the custom of the earth. So now let us get our father drunk with wine, and let us sleep with him, so that we may keep our family alive through our father. So they made their father drunk that night. The firstborn went in and slept with him, and he did not know that he had laid down and gotten up, or she had laid down with him and gotten up. On the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, look, I slept last night with my father and went to make him drunk with wine, and you go in too, and you sleep with him, so that we may keep our family through our father. When I look at this, I find it interesting that even his daughters had lived there so long, they had become so infected, if you will, with sin and perversion that they thought this was a good thing. It's more important to keep our family line going than to live morality. And that's what's happened here in America today. We want what we want, when we want, how we want it. And it doesn't matter what God has to say. And that's what the world is looking at. I find it interesting that one of his daughters, she became the Moabitess, which the Moabites were always enemies of God. And the other one, the lineage from her became an Ammonite, which were also enemies of God. These two women did something they shouldn't have done. They knew better, but they just didn't care. And so now they become enemies of God. Their families become enemies of God. In verses 25 through 27, we see a picture of peace and confidence. Abraham did not lose anything. He didn't even lose a night's sleep. It says when he woke up the next morning. God could have chose Abraham's lifestyle. He could have been a man of great character and moral conviction. But when we start to lose our biblical convictions and replace them with anything else, we also are doomed. If we're supposed to be people of influence, we're supposed to be good influence. We're supposed to walk and talk and behave like true, genuine believers. Like what God has to say is all that's important. Early in Sunday school, we was talking about the book of Daniel. You know, the thing I love about the book of Daniel, one of the things that it talks about in the whole book, it does show the sovereignty of God, but it makes it clear. Daniel will make it very, very, very clear. Abraham will make it very clear. And it needs to become clear in our heart and mind. There's only one hero in the Bible. It's not me. It's not you. It's not Daniel or Isaiah or Ezekiel or any of the others. The only hero in the Bible is God. And you and I need to purpose in our hearts that we're going to follow him no matter what. If this world gets so perverted, we may have to move somewhere. I'm not saying we move off the planet, not until the rapture. And when that comes, we will move off this planet. And we'll be going to a city whose builder and maker is God. It's called the New Jerusalem. Now, I don't know how long that's going to be. It could happen today, or it could be 1,000 years. We're not told. We are told it will happen. But what about how we live in the meantime? If Lot had not been dragged out of Sodom and Gomorrah by the angels, he would have been destroyed. He had no idea just how close judgment really was. And doom. This is the invitation. I don't know where any of you are spiritually as far as your walk with God. But are you an influencer? Are you a person that when you live your life, your neighbors, people that you work with, they know you're a believer, not because you tell them, hey, I go to Shawan Baptist Church, but because they see you, purpose in your heart. I'll not get involved with that filthy conversation. I'll not watch this kind of TV or movie. I'll not listen to this. I'll not say these kinds of things. I'll do these things and not the others. And we can almost bet if American culture says it's good, we probably want to run the other direction. In most cases, if not all cases. My grandfather died in 1974. Bob Weldon. He was 84 years old, godliest man I've ever met. And if he were to come back today and see the culture that he left behind, he wouldn't believe it. My grandpa never locked his door. You remember skeleton keys? He had a skeleton key that's up on the shelf outside on the porch, but it was dusty because nobody ever used it. He never locked his house. He walked to church on Sunday and walked back. Then when he get in his car in 1947 Chevrolet, when he got in his car, he'd go to town to get groceries or whatever, didn't lock his door. Didn't need to. Nothing ever got stolen. Well, you certainly wouldn't do that in the neighborhood that's there today. Or you'd probably come home and find that a lot had been taken. Our society, our world is corrupt. It's against everything God stands for. And it's time that you and I stand up for God just like Abraham did and influence this world. They're either going to change it to us or we're going to change it to them. Let me share this and I'll close. In Amsterdam, there's a church called Nord. Nord is north. It's the North Church. And there was a time when, back in the 16, 17, 1800s, there was a time when this church was just, it was a lot of people going there. They were worshiping people. Even people like Rembrandt went there. It was a powerful, powerful church, making an influence in Amsterdam. And if you go there today and go to the church, you're going to have to pass about 4 rows of brothels, because now all that kind of industry, drugs and brothels and all that, has moved into the area, and the church sits right in the middle of it. And now society, it's a museum now, by the way. I don't go there. I used to take people there. I don't take people there anymore because the red light district keeps growing and growing and growing and getting worse and worse and worse. And that's the way it is. And the people who are there, they're no longer in that church making a difference for the king. They're letting the world make a difference in them. Is the world making a difference in you, or are you making a difference on the world? Every head bowed, every eye closed. If you've never